This is the second of a series of video tutorials on creating Rhino plugins that use the UMI framework. In this tutorial, we'll be learning about how you can define custom settings for your plugin, and how you can persist these settings in the UMI bundle. We've been working with a transit carbon plugin that calculates the carbon dioxide used by building occupants. Our extremely simple model has a single parameter, the carbon dioxide released per occupant. Previously, we hard-coded this value in the plugin, but in this tutorial, we'll be both allowing the user to set it and saving the value in the UMI bundle so that when a project is reopened, the new value will persist. First, we will define the settings class to store this value. We only have one setting, but it's still a good idea to create a class to store it, so that if we want to add more later, it will be easy. Create a new class as normal. Let's call it transit carbon settings. We'll give it our single setting value, which is that transit carbon factor. And we'll give it a default value. Now we need a place to actually store these settings while Rhino is running. Since this is plugin level data, we'll store it in the plugin object itself. Open up the plugin class and add a property for the settings. Now we'll modify the calculation command to actually use this settings value as opposed to that hard-coded value. Make this change in the command class. At this point, the plugin should operate exactly as it did before, because we still haven't given the user a way to modify this value. To do that, we'll add a second command. Let's call it set transit carbon factor. This will be a simple Rhino command that uses text console input to allow the user to set the factor. First, we load the factor from the current settings. Then we prompt the user to change it if desired. Remember the command period trick to get new namespaces. Then, if the user didn't cancel, we'll update the stored settings with the value they entered. At this point, nothing has been saved to the UMI bundle. We haven't interacted with the UMI at all. But let's take a moment to make sure that the plugin is still doing what we think it'll do. We can launch Rhino. And let's open that project we had before. Okay. If we run calculate transit carbon, we'll get our numbers. And then we'll run set transit carbon factor. See, it was 1500, let's change it to 1000. Now if we run calculate transit carbon again, the number should go down. It looks like they did. So this is all working correctly. Let's close Rhino and go back to our plugin. So if we reopen Rhino, when we run that again, the number would revert back to that 1500. So we're going to change this by storing the number inside the UMI bundle itself. That's inside the .umi file. That way, when a user opens a new project, then they'll get the updated number. They won't have to re-enter it every time. So we'll be saving these settings as JSON, JavaScript object notation. It's a standard way of doing this kind of thing. But that means that we have to bring a JSON conversion library into our project. Fortunately, UMI already uses one, so you can just add that one. So right-click References and choose Add Reference, and click on Browse. And go to the UMI installation directory again. You're probably already there if you're following these tutorials in order. And find newtonsoft.json.dll. Go ahead and add it. And now you can do JSON serialization and deserialization. So first, let's just write a simple method to do the saving. We'll also put it in the plugin class itself. We'll add it at the bottom, and we'll call it Save Settings. The first thing we do is we get the current UMI context. This is the standard first thing you do. Remember command period. And again, if that context is null, that means an UMI project isn't open, so there's nothing to do. So now we'll convert the current settings to JSON. And again, we can use command period to get into that newtonsoft.json library. We're going to serialize our settings object. So that's this object right here. We're just turning it into JSON, into a string. Now, we save that JSON to the current UMI context using auxiliary files. We can store text. Since JSON is just text. And we'll give it a file name. Auxiliary files are it's UMI speak for miscellaneous additional plugin files, and this is exactly what it's used for, saving your own settings, for example. Okay. So this method will save those settings into the UMI bundle, but nothing's calling this method, so they won't actually be saved. So we need to set that up. Now the best time to save these settings is whenever Rhino is saving the Rhino document, because that's the same time that UMI is saving the UMI bundle. So we need to hook that up. And we hook that up when our plugin is loading. So what we're going to do is we're going to override our plugin's onload method. And this is how you customize the plugin load behavior. So if I start typing protected override and then a space, I'll get a list of things I can override. And we want to override onload. And what we're going to do is we're going to subscribe to a Rhino event whenever the document is saved. So this means when Rhino saves the document, I want to do something. And we do that by typing rhino.doc.endSaveDocument plus equals, and then I'm just going to hit tab to automatically complete this for me. And now, this is what it's going to do whenever the document is saved. And all we want to do is save our settings. Easy peasy. Okay. This is only half the story, of course. We also need to load these settings whenever a new project is loaded. So we'll do it the same way. First, we'll write a method to do the loading. And what this method is going to do is it'll take any UMI context and it will load settings out of that context. So it basically operates the way save settings does, but in reverse. First, we find the path to the JSON file that has our settings. And that comes out of the context auxiliary files. We're getting the full path of transit carbon settings.json. So make sure these file names match, right? What this is doing when you save is it's creating a file with this name somewhere in the UMI bundle. And what this is doing is that you're asking the UMI bundle where the full path to that file is. You're asking where it created it. So you get a full path back, which means you can read the JSON out of that file. And then you can turn that JSON into an actual transit carbon settings object and set that back to the currently used settings. So this will load the settings. But again, nothing's actually calling this method, so nothing will ever be loaded. We need to configure that. And we'll do it in the same place we configured the saving in our plugin's onload method, where it configures its own loading behavior. The event we want is in UMI event source. Use control period to get there. Specifically, UMI event source.instance. And the event is called project opened. Again, I'll do plus equals and then tab my way there. And inside this method, we'll simply load settings out of the new UMI context that was created when the project got loaded. So let's try this out. Let's launch Rhino. And open that same project we've been using. Now, we should have a new set transit carbon factor command. Okay, great. That's all still there. Now, if we save it, and we close Rhino, and we reopen it, if we call set transit carbon factor again, we should see that updated value. But we don't. It's still 1500. It didn't work. Why is that? The key to understanding this is to understand where we told our plugin to load things. Right? That happened in this onload method. And this is the method that is called when our plugin is loaded. But by default, Rhino only loads plugins once you run a command from them, which means this plugin wasn't loaded when the project was loaded, when the UMI project was loaded, because we hadn't run any commands yet. So it didn't know to load its value out of the new bundle. So the way to fix this is to tell Rhino to load our plugin as soon as Rhino starts, not to wait for a command to be run. And this is the way all UMI plugins work for exactly this reason. The way to do that is very simple. If I type public override, and then a space, I can see a list of overrides. And I want to override load time. And instead of returning this base.load time, we're going to return plugin load time .at startup. And now let's try it. So we'll load that same project we've been using. Set the transit carbon factor. Let's set it down to 1200. Now let's save our project. It's a very important step. And let's close Rhino, and we'll reopen it. And now, if we open that project again, and we run set transit carbon factor, we should see the updated value. And there it is, 1200. In this tutorial, you learned how to set up plugin-specific settings and how to save them and load them from an UMI bundle. In the next tutorial, you'll learn how to create your own simulation tab within the UMI simulation panel.